The intercom crackled across 40 stories of marble and glass. "Attention all staff. We have an unauthorized individual in the lobby." She didn't move. Not when the manager called security. Not when the young clerk took her credit card between two fingers, like it might stain him, and lock it in a steel box with a smile. Not when the woman behind the desk reached for her arm. She just stood there, navy t-shirt, jeans, a scuff on her left sneaker. Perfectly still. 20 phones were up now, a live stream counter climbing past 1,000. An old man in the corner slowly folding his newspaper. And behind the front desk, Warren Stills straightened his cufflinks. A man absolutely certain he was protecting something. He had looked at her for 3 seconds and decided who she was. He was about to find out. Minutes. That's all it took. She didn't dress up. That was the first decision she made that morning. And like most important decisions, it looked like nothing from the outside. Naomi Reeves stood in front of the mirror in her hotel room and looked at herself for a long time. 42 years old. CEO of a hospitality group that owned 57 hotels across the country. A woman whose signature was on lease agreements, and acquisition contracts, and staff handbooks in cities from Portland to Miami. She was wearing a navy t-shirt, jeans, dark straight cut, no distressing, white sneakers with a small scuff on the left toe she had noticed that morning and chosen not to fix. No jewelry except small gold studs she'd had since college. No designer bag, no blazer, no armor of any kind. Just her. She looked at herself in the mirror and she thought, good, because that was exactly the point. She picked up something from the nightstand before she left. A piece of paper, folded into quarters, the size of a playing card. Old paper. The kind of old where the creases have gone soft from being opened and closed so many times they barely hold a shape anymore. The color had gone from white to the particular off-yellow of something that has lived in pockets and drawers and the bottom of bags for a very long time. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. She knew what it said. She just held it for a moment. The weight of it almost nothing. The weight of what it meant something else entirely. Then she put it in the front pocket of her jeans, and she walked out the door. Chicago in October has a particular kind of honesty. The cold doesn't perform. It doesn't threaten. It just arrives, off the lake, finding every gap between your collar and your neck. Every place where you thought the fabric was enough. It moves through downtown like it owns the grid, which in a way it does. The city was built around wind. The wind never forgot that. Naomi walked 3 blocks. She could have taken a car. There was a car waiting downstairs. Her assistant Audra had texted at 6:45 to confirm it was there. Naomi had texted back 2 words. Not today. Audra, who had worked with her for 6 years and understood the shape of her silences, had responded with a single thumbs up and nothing else. Some things you have to walk toward. She turned the corner onto Michigan Avenue, and the building came into view. The Pinnacle Grand Hotel. 40 stories of dark glass and limestone rising out of the downtown grid like it had decided to be permanent. The entrance was understated in the way that very expensive things are understated. No neon, no banners, just heavy brass frame doors and a canopy in matte charcoal and the kind of quiet that signals, to people who know how to read it, that money lives here. Across the street, on the building that housed the regional headquarters, a plaque she had approved 3 years ago caught the morning light. Reeves Hospitality Group, Midwest Regional Office. She didn't look at it. She looked at the doors. And she thought about her mother. Ruth Reeves had worked in hotels for 22 years. Not as a guest, not as management, not as someone who booked conference rooms, or arranged flower arrangements in the lobby, or decided which thread count the pillowcases should be. Ruth Reeves had worked as a housekeeper. She had known, by the 3rd week of any job, which rooms had the heating vent that rattled on the left side of the wall, which elevator was slower in the morning when the kitchen staff were moving carts through it, which corridor had the carpeting that needed an extra pass, because the pattern hid things the guests left behind. She had known the infrastructure of every building she worked, in the way doctors know anatomy, from the inside. From the parts that guests never saw. She had beautiful hands. That was the thing Naomi always remembered first. Strong and careful, with the particular roughness that comes from industrial cleaning solutions and dry air and 22 years of work. Hands that could braid hair in the dark. Hands that could feel a fever through a forehead at 2 in the morning. Hands that had never once touched the high thread count she made up for other people, in rooms she would leave before those other people arrived. When Naomi was 16, she went to pick her mother up from a late shift. It was October then, too. The rain that night was the persistent kind. Not dramatic, just steady and cold and thoroughly committed to soaking through whatever you were wearing before you noticed it was happening. She went into the hotel lobby to wait. She had been inside maybe 30 seconds when the security guard found her. He was not unkind. That was the part that stayed. He was professional, neutral. The voice of a man who had said the same sentence so many times it had stopped being connected to any particular feeling. "This area is for guests only, miss," she tried to explain. "My mother works here. I'm just waiting for her. She's on the housekeeping staff." He listened. He nodded, in the way people nod when they've already decided. Then he gestured toward the door. She stood outside in the rain for 40 minutes. Nobody opened the door to check on her. Nobody came out with an umbrella. Nobody asked if she was okay or if she needed anything, or if there was somewhere she could wait that wasn't a wet sidewalk on October. When Ruth finally came out, she took one look at her daughter. Wet, quiet, with a look on her face that Ruth recognized because she had worn it herself for 22 years. Ruth didn't say anything. She put her arm around Naomi's shoulders. They walked to the bus stop together. That night, Naomi lay in bed and listened to the rain on the window, and something in her chest went very quiet and very certain. The way things go certain when they stop being about this specific incident and become about something larger, something that you understand. At 16, mostly in your body. The words come later. The feeling was already there. Permanent. The kind that becomes part of you. She pushed through the front doors of the Pinnacle Grand at 9:14 in the morning. The lobby did what it always did, the scale of it. 30-foot ceilings with custom chandeliers that diffused the light so there were no shadows, just gradients of warmth. Marble floors in a pale gray, with silver veining that reflected everything above them. The arrangement of the seating area to the left, deep velvet armchairs in charcoal, low tables with fresh flowers in simple vases, the kind of staging that says comfort without announcing it. She had chosen those armchairs herself 7 years ago, when the Pinnacle Grand had been a distressed property with a deferred maintenance backlog and a reputation problem. And she had walked through it for the first time as the new owner and spent 4 hours making notes about what it could be. She had chosen the marble, the chandelier design, the particular shade of charcoal for the upholstery. She walked across it now in her scuffed sneakers ends, and she felt the quiet of it, and she thought, this should feel like welcome for everyone who comes through that door. She passed the seating area on the left. A man was sitting in one of the armchairs, older, 70 or thereabouts, silver hair well kept. A newspaper open in his lap, though he wasn't reading it at the moment. He was looking out toward the entrance with the patient expression of someone who had made peace with waiting. He had a good face, the kind of face that has been lived in for a long time. She passed the concierge desk on the right, and that was where Soledad Vega was standing. Soledad was 34 years old and had worked the concierge desk at the Pinnacle Grand for 3 years. She was good at her job in the specific way that people are good at things they care about. Attentively, with a kind of investment that went past the job description. She knew the neighborhood restaurants the way a local knows them, not from a list. She remembered guests from previous stays. She had a habit of anticipating things before guests asked, which was the rarest skill in hospitality and the hardest to teach. She also had a way of holding herself at her station that looked from a distance like professionalism, like composure. It was not composure. It was the particular stillness of someone who had learned that staying small was sometimes the only way to stay. Soledad had looked up when the lobby doors opened. Force of habit. She looked up for every entrance. She tracked arrivals. She saw Naomi Reeves walk in, and she went very still in a way that was different from her usual stillness. Her eyes moved to her computer screen. The reservation system was open. The entry had been there since the system processed it at 6:58 that morning. In Reeves. House suite, executive override, owner clearance level. She read it again, as if rereading would change something, or clarify something, or give her a script for what came next. She looked up. Naomi was walking toward the front desk. Soledad looked at Warren Stills, who was standing behind the front desk adjusting his cufflinks and hadn't noticed the entrance yet. She looked back at Naomi. Then she looked at her keyboard. And she looked down. That moment would live in Soledad's memory for a long time. Not the dramatic moments that came after. This one. The moment she saw the name on the screen and saw the woman crossing the lobby and chose, for the last time in her professional life, to look away. Warren Stills had been managing the Pinnacle Grand for 6 years. He had arrived as a rescue operation. The previous management had let things drift. Service inconsistencies, maintenance backlogs, a TripAdvisor problem that had taken 18 months to stop bleeding. Warren had come in with process and structure and a very clear vision of what the Pinnacle Grand was and who it was for. He dressed for authority, not flashily, precisely. Dark navy or charcoal suit, always pressed to the degree that looked effortless but wasn't. Silver cufflinks. Shoes that cost more than most people's car payments, maintained to a condition that looked new. Hair that hadn't moved in 6 years because Warren Stills was not a man who allowed disorder in things he could control. He used words like positioning and brand integrity and guest experience as if they were his invention, as if he had discovered personally that hotels existed to serve people and was generously allowing others in on the insight. He had a system. Nobody had written it down. That was by design. There was no handbook page, no training module, no policy document that could be pulled from a file and read in front of a review board, but it existed as it lived in the way he ran his morning briefings, in the particular pause before certain sentences, on the language he used, premium guest profile, core demographic, brand-aligned clientele, words that sounded like industry vocabulary until you paid attention to how they were applied, until you noticed what they meant in practice. His staff had learned it the way you learn things that are never said directly. Through repetition, through watching, through the 100 small calibrations of behavior that happen when you understand, without being told explicitly, what is expected of you. Bryce Okafor was 27 years old and had been working the front desk for 8 months. He was in the phase of a new job where the dominant emotion is the desire to be useful, to demonstrate good judgment, to be the kind of employee that the people above you are glad to have around. He was smart and eager, and he had watched Warren carefully for 8 months, and he had learned things Warren had never said in words. Darlene Pruitt was 30 years old and had been at the Pinnacle Grand for 3 years. She had a mother in Memphis she sent money to every month. A lease renewal coming up that she was already anxious about. Student loans from a business administration degree that she was still at 30 working through. Darlene could not afford disruption. Darlene had learned very efficiently that the way to avoid disruption was to read the room correctly and act accordingly. She had gotten very good at reading the room, the way Warren Stills had defined it. Warren saw Naomi walk in. He processed her in under 3 seconds. Plain clothes, no luggage beyond a small crossbody bag, no visible traveling companion or assistant, no phone pressed to her ear, no markers of the kind that his system was calibrated to recognize as signals of belonging. He was already adjusting his expression before she reached the desk, polite on the surface. The surface was always polite, firm underneath, the expression of a man who believed that what he was doing was management, was standard, was in fact a form of service, maintaining the environment that the right guests deserved. Naomi walked up to the counter. She didn't rush, didn't over-explain, didn't perform anything. She just walked up and stopped and looked at Warren Stills with an expression that was entirely neutral and said with the calm of someone who has stood in a lot of rooms like this, "I have a reservation. Penthouse suite. The name is Reeves." She placed her ID on the counter, then her credit card. The matte black kind, no visible bank logo on the front. The kind of card that doesn't need to announce itself. Warren picked up her ID with 2 fingers. He looked at it, then at her, then at it again. "Our penthouse suites," he said, with the measured patience of a man performing reasonableness, "are reserved for platinum tier members. There may have been a booking error." "There's no error, ma'am. I'd like my room key." Her voice did not rise, did not sharpen. It was the same temperature it had been when she first spoke, steady, even. The voice of someone who has had this conversation before in different rooms with different people and has made a decision, somewhere along the way, not to perform distress for audiences that are looking for it. Bryce Okafor, who had been watching from the far end of the counter with the attention of someone looking for an opportunity to be useful, reached for her credit card with 2 fingers, not roughly, not aggressively, a kind of deliberate, exaggerated carefulness that communicated, without words, that he was handling something whose legitimacy he doubted. He turned it over, studied the front, studied the back. Then he reached under the counter, and produced a small brushed steel lockbox, the kind used for items being held pending verification. He placed the card inside with the gravity of someone making a record, clicked it shut, smiled. "We'll need to verify this with the issuing bank before we can proceed." He said it like a policy, like a kindness, like he was saving her from something. The lobby heard every word. Jordan Faber was 29 years old, and she wrote a travel blog out of Nashville that had over 4 years of consistent work grown into something that paid her rent and her health insurance, and occasionally her flights. She had checked in the previous evening. She had been at the lobby bar at 9:14 in the morning, nursing a coffee and editing photographs on her laptop, and half listening to the ambient sounds of a hotel lobby doing its morning routine. She looked up when she felt the shift. She wasn't sure what to call it exactly. A change in the quality of the air. The particular silence that falls over a public space when something is wrong. She looked at the front desk. She looked at the woman in the navy t-shirt. She looked at Bryce Okafor with the lockbox. She looked at the smile. She reached for her phone. Beside her, Eli Wachowski, 31, her co-writer on the blog, the person who handled the video content while Jordan handled the words, had already picked up his. Pressed the record button. A small red circle appeared in the corner of his screen. Live. 6 viewers.
Then 20.
Then 63. The counter climbing with the irregular rhythm of something that people were finding by accident and stopping to watch. Behind the front desk, Darlene Pruitt pressed the intercom button. She pressed it with the efficiency of someone executing a protocol. Her voice, when it came through the lobby speakers, was professional, measured. The voice of a person who had been trained for this. Security to the front lobby. "We may have an unauthorized guest attempting to access a premium suite. Please respond." The words traveled through the speaker system and arrived in the lobby and hung there, unauthorized. Naomi heard it. She felt it the way you feel something that has been said before. Not this exact sentence, but the sentence underneath it. The one it was translating. She breathed in, she breathed out, the way her mother had taught her. Not explicitly. Ruth Reeves had never sat her daughter down and said, "Here is how you breathe when the world is deciding you don't belong in it." She had just done it herself, for 22 years, in rooms where she was the help and not the guest. Breathing in a particular way that kept the dignity intact. Naomi had absorbed it through proximity, the way you absorb the things that matter. She was 29 years old and she was in Los Angeles. She had a conference, a serious one, the kind that the industry paid attention to. She had been asked to present on hospitality investment strategy for secondary markets. She had worked on the presentation for 3 weeks. She was not yet CEO of anything. She was the founder of a company with 2 properties and a vision that people were beginning cautiously to take seriously. She had dressed for it, a navy suit, good fabric, not the most expensive thing she owned, but chosen with the kind of care that understands that first impressions in rooms where you're already starting at a deficit require investment. She walked up to the hotel desk, gave her name. The man behind the desk looked at her confirmation number, then at her, then back at the confirmation number. "We'll need to verify this," he said. She waited. She approached again. "Still processing," he said. Apologetic face, professional apology, the kind that costs nothing. She watched 3 men check in during that time. One after another, names given, keys produced. Conversation brief and pleasant. No verification process visible or mentioned. She waited another 40 minutes. She was calm. She was professional. She was the version of herself that had been trained, through experience, to understand that performing distress in these moments would be used as evidence against her. So she stood. She waited. She breathed. After 2 hours, the manager was called. After the manager was called, she got her room. That night, she sat in the room, a standard room, not the room she had booked, though she didn't have the energy left to fight that particular battle. And she opened her laptop. She didn't sleep. She wrote. Not a complaint, not an email. She wrote pages about what she wanted to build, the specificity of it. Not just hotels, a different experience of hotels. A different relationship between a building and every human being who walked through its doors. She wrote until the sky outside started getting lighter. When the room service tray arrived at 3 a.m., she ate without tasting anything, then reached for the paper napkin that came with it. She took a pen from the nightstand. She wrote 4 words, "I will own this." She folded the napkin, put it in her jacket pocket. She fell asleep. just before sunrise with the laptop still open. That napkin had been in her possession ever since. Back in the lobby of the Pinnacle Grand, a security guard appeared from the side corridor. His name was Paul, 26 years old, 6 months on the job. He had the posture of someone who had practiced looking ready, because they understood that looking ready was part of the job. He walked into the lobby and assessed the scene the way he had been trained to assess it. A single individual at the front desk. Staff behind the desk, no visible altercation, no raised voices, no physical confrontation, and a woman standing very still. Paul had been trained to respond to situations. He had not been trained to respond to stillness. The stillness was harder, because it didn't have a protocol attached to it. He looked at Warren. Warren tilted his head toward Naomi with the minimal movement of a man accustomed to being understood. Paul looked at Naomi, and Naomi looked back at him with an expression that was not aggressive, and was not pleading, and was not anything he had a category for. It was simply present. Like she had been here before and she knew how it went, and she had made arrangements for how it was going to go this time. Paul cleared his throat. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to stop. One word. Same temperature as everything else she'd said. Not loud. Not sharp. Paul stopped. In the concierge station, Soledad Vega was not looking at her keyboard anymore. She was looking at the lobby, at the security guard who had stopped mid-sentence, at Warren behind the desk recalibrating, at Darlene whose hands were flat on the counter in a way that didn't look like a natural resting position, at Bryce, who was looking at the lockbox, and at the woman at the desk who had said one word and meant it. Soledad thought about the complaints she had filed, 3 of them, over 6 months, each one carefully documented, each one sent through the proper channel to the regional office. The first 2 had come back as reviewed, no action required. The third had not come back at all, no response, not even an automated acknowledgement. She had learned what that meant. She had learned it, and she had adjusted her behavior accordingly. She had become smaller, more careful. She had learned to see things and register them internally, and let them pass without becoming her problem. She had learned that speaking up in this specific building meant paying a price that she, with her rent and her daughter, and her particular set of financial realities, was not in a position to afford. She had learned it so well that it had stopped feeling like learning, and started feeling like just how things were. But now she was looking at this woman who had presented her ID and her card, and stated her reservation, and been met with a lockbox and an intercom announcement, who was standing there like she had been standing in places that didn't want her for decades. Like she knew something about that specific skill that Soledad recognized. Soledad thought, I know that woman's name. She thought, I know why she's here. She thought, if I don't say something. She thought, what happens if I do? She thought, what happens if I don't? The man in the armchair had put his newspaper down. His name was Reginald Tate. He was 71 years old, retired after 31 years as a high school history teacher in Evanston. He had driven into the city this morning to meet his granddaughter for an early lunch. He was a man who arrived early to things, because his father had told him when he was young that being late was a way of telling people their time mattered less than yours. Reginald had never forgotten that. He was always early. He had been sitting in this armchair for 22 minutes. He had watched the whole thing, the entrance, the desk, the ID, the card, the lockbox, the smile on the man's face when he closed it, the intercom announcement. He had watched it and he had felt something move in him, something old and specific, not unfamiliar. He had a daughter, 38 years old, an architect, a brilliant woman who carried herself with the particular grace of someone who had learned to take up exactly the right amount of space, enough to be taken seriously. Not so much that people felt threatened and reached for their tools. 8 years ago, Reginald had been at an airport with her. He had watched a gate agent treat her with a kind of dismissal that had a name even if the gate agent would have denied it had that name. Reginald had stood there. He had watched. And he had done the calculation that people do when they're tired and it's an airport, and the flight is in 40 minutes, and their daughter is already handling it with more composure than should be required. He had done nothing. He thought about that airport a lot, more than his daughter knew. She had moved on from it, or appeared to have, the way people move on from things when they've had too much practice. But Reginald had not moved on from his own stillness in that moment. He looked at the woman at the desk. He looked at the security guard who had stopped mid-sentence. He looked at the lobby, which was full of people making the same calculation he had made at the airport. The calculation of it's not my situation and I don't want to make it worse and maybe it's not what it looks like and the flight is in 40 minutes. Reginald Tate took his reading glasses off. He folded them into the breast pocket of his jacket. He stood up. He walked across the marble lobby floor. He stopped beside Naomi Reeves. He didn't say anything, didn't introduce himself, didn't announce what he was doing or why, didn't ask permission or look for acknowledgement. He just stood there, next to her, like that was the most natural thing in the world. Soledad saw it happen. She watched Reginald get up from the armchair, watched him cross the lobby with the unhurried deliberateness of a man who had made a decision and was implementing it, watched him take his place beside this woman he had never met, and something in her chest broke open. Not loudly, not dramatically. The way things break open when the last reason you were using to hold them closed turns out not to be as solid as you thought. She thought, if he can, she thought. I have known this woman's name for 23 minutes and I have stood here and said nothing, she thought. I have 3 unanswered complaints in the files somewhere in a regional office and I know what this is and I know what that name on my screen means. And I have said nothing, she thought. If he can. She came out from behind her station. Her legs felt strange, like they were operating ahead of her, like some part of her had made the decision before the rest of her caught up. She walked to the edge of the front desk. Warren saw her coming. Solod, the quiet. The particular quiet of authority that expects to be obeyed without the volume. Back to your station, she kept walking. Solod. She stopped at the edge of the desk. She looked at Warren. Then she looked at Naomi. Then she said, her reservation is valid. Her voice was not perfectly steady. It shook slightly on the first word. Just the first one. I saw it in the system this morning. Penthouse suite, confirmed and paid. Executive override, owner-level clearance. The lobby went still, not the ambient quiet of a well-managed space. The held-breath silence of a room full of people who have collectively registered something true has just been said. Warren's voice came back low, controlled, the voice of a man who was recalibrating. Back to your station. Soledad looked at him. She thought about the 3 complaints. She thought about her daughter, 7 years old, who was going to walk into rooms like this someday, and would be shaped part by what kind of person her mother turned out to be. She said no, and she meant it. And Warren Stills, who had been managing people for a very long time, recognized the specific sound of someone meaning something. It was different from the sound of someone being difficult. Difficult could be managed. This was different. This was a person who had run the calculation and come out the other side of it, and there was nothing left to threaten. He had no move for that, not a ready one. Naomi had been watching Soledad. She had noticed her at the concierge desk from the moment she walked in, had noticed the particular quality of her stillness, had seen, in the 23 minutes she had been standing at this counter, the way Soledad had looked at the screen, and then at Warren, and then down at her keyboard. She understood that look. She understood the calculation behind it. She also understood what it had cost exactly for Soledad to cross the floor just now and say those words in front of Warren Stills and a lobby full of people. That kind of courage doesn't come free. It comes at the end of something. Some accumulation of a specific kind of tire. She looked at Soledad and thought, I see you. She didn't say it. The lobby was not the place. Later there would be a time for it, but she held it, registered it, filed it in the category of things that matter. She reached into her pocket and took out her phone, called a number. 1 ring, Audra. Audra's voice was immediate, calm. The voice of a woman who had been parked in a coffee shop 3 blocks away since 7:30, doing other work waiting. I'm logging everything from the moment you entered. Timestamps running. Good. A breath. Get Margaret ready. A pause of exactly 1 second. She's been ready since 8. Naomi ended the call. She looked at Warren Stills. She looked at Bryce Okafor standing near the lockbox. She looked at Darlene Pruitt with her hands flat on the counter. She looked at Reginald Tate standing beside her, still quiet, still just there. She looked at Soledad, who had not moved back to her station. She looked at Paul, the security guard, who had not moved at all. She said stop. She looked at Jordan Faber in the corner with her phone. At Ely beside her, his screen angled toward the desk. She took in the lobby that she had walked through for the first time 7 years ago, with a notepad and a vision of what it could be. And then Warren Stills made a decision. He had been making the wrong decisions all morning. He made one more. He reached for the intercom. He pressed the button. His voice went out through the speakers, through the lobby, through the restaurant and the bar and the elevator banks and the guest corridors on 14 floors above them. Attention all Pinnacle Grand staff. This is a final notice. We have an unauthorized individual in the lobby who has refused to cooperate with standard verification procedures and is disrupting hotel operations. I am requesting immediate assistance at the front desk. The individual is to be escorted from the premises. Escorted from the premises. The words landed in the lobby like something thrown. Naomi heard them. She felt them in the specific place she'd been feeling things like this since she was 16 years old and standing in the rain on a sidewalk. In Charlotte, she breathed in, out. Her mother's rhythm, her mother's method, the thing that kept the dignity intact. She stood very still, and she waited. Because some things you have to walk toward, and some things you have to let walk into themselves. And Warren Stills, who had no idea whose hotel he was standing in, was walking very efficiently into the thing he had built. Reginald Tate was still beside her. He had not said a word, had not moved, had not looked at his phone or adjusted his jacket or done any of the small things people do when they're uncomfortable with stillness. He just stood there, like a man who had somewhere else to be and had chosen, very deliberately, to be here instead. On his mind, he was at an airport, 8 years ago. His daughter's face when she turned around and found him exactly where he had been standing, not beside her, just standing at a distance, that face. He would have done it differently now. He was doing it differently now. Better late, he thought, than spent the rest of your life at that airport. Soledad Vega was still at the edge of the front desk. Her heart was doing something irregular and distracting, but her face had gone very calm, the particular calm that arrives after the fear burns through itself. She thought about 3 unanswered complaints. She thought about 14 months of making herself small. She thought about the woman whose name she had seen on Netflix at 6:58 this morning. No more. Just those 2 words. Clean and final no more. Jordan Faber kept filming. She had not said anything in several minutes. Not to Eli. Not to her viewers. She just kept the phone steady and kept filming because she understood, with the instinct of someone who had been paying attention to the world for a living for 4 years, that what was happening in this lobby was not a misunderstanding. She didn't know yet exactly what it was, but she knew what it wasn't. She kept filming, and the counter on Eli's live stream climbed past 900, past 1,000, past 1,500, because people were finding it, sharing it, sending it to each other with messages that said things like, "Watch this. This is happening right now. And I know exactly what I'm looking at." They did know. That was the thing. They knew because they had seen it, or been it, or known someone who had been it. In hotel lobbies and airport gates and restaurant hostess stands, and the 1,000 ordinary places where certain people are made to feel, without a single word that could be quoted back in a review board, that the space they are standing in has decided they don't quite belong. They recognized it. Ivan through a phone screen, even with no context, and recognition, it turns out, travels fast. Naomi stood in the center of the lobby. Her hands were relaxed at her sides. Her shoulders were level. Her breathing was even. Inside, she was doing the thing she had been doing for 26 years in rooms like this, holding the thing that wanted to come out. Not suppressing it, not denying it, just holding it. The way you hold something that belongs to you and that you are not going to hand to anyone in this room. The grief of it, the specific exhaustion of being 42 years old and the owner of 57 hotels and still standing in a lobby being told you don't belong in it. She held it, and she waited, and in approximately 40 seconds, everything in this lobby was going to change, but not yet. Right now, she stood in the marble room she had built, in the light she had chosen. On the floor her mother's hands had never touched. She breathed in, out, and she held the line. The 60 seconds passed. Then another 60. Warren Stills was still standing behind the counter, still waiting for something to arrive and make this easier for him. Still holding the posture of a man who believed that authority was a thing you wore and therefore could not be removed without your permission. He was wrong about that. He had been wrong about several things this morning, but that one most of all. Paul, the security guard, had come through the side corridor at a measured pace, and then stopped when he saw the lobby. Not dramatically. He didn't freeze or stumble, he just stopped. took in the room, made the kind of rapid assessment that people make when the situation they've been called to doesn't match the situation they were described. He had been told, unauthorized individual disrupting operations. What he found was a woman standing perfectly still, an elderly man standing beside her, a concierge who had left her station and was not going back, phones raised in at least 3 corners of the lobby, a live stream counter that someone had positioned so he could see it from where he stood, 1,400 viewers. Climbing. Paul looked at Warren. Warren tilted his head, the minimal gesture of a man who expected to be understood. Paul looked at Naomi. Naomi looked back at him with an expression that was not threatening and was not pleading and was not performing anything at all. It was simply present, waiting, like she had already seen this scene play out and knew the shape of it. Paul looked at his shoes for exactly 1 second. Then he stayed where he was. Warren noticed. Of course he noticed. Warren noticed everything that happened in this lobby. It was the skill that had made him good at this job for a long time, and it was also this morning the thing that was making everything worse. Because noticing meant he couldn't pretend he hadn't seen Paul stop, couldn't pretend the lobby wasn't reorganizing itself in a direction he hadn't authorized. He said quietly through the particular stillness of his jaw, "Paul, escort the guest out." Paul said, "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask." "You don't need to ask her anything," Soledad, still at the edge of the desk, still not moving. Her voice was steadier now than it had been 2 minutes ago, which was the strange thing about crossing a line you've been afraid of for a long time. Once you're on the other side of it, the fear changes shape. It doesn't disappear. It just stops being the biggest thing in the room. Warren turned to her. The full weight of his attention, the expression that had made junior staff revise their behavior for 6 years. "You are one more word away from losing the job," Soledad said. "Then I lose it." 3 words. And she meant all 3. Warren had been managing people for over 2 decades. He understood the difference between someone being difficult and someone being done. Difficult could be managed. Done was something else. Done was a person who had run the full calculation, the rent, the references, the professional consequences, all of it, and come out the other side with their answer. Soledad was done. He had no protocol for that. Bryce Okafor was having the worst morning of his professional life, which was a short professional life, 8 months and 12 days, but still. This was the worst one. He was standing near the lockbox, and he was trying very hard to look like a person who had made a reasonable professional decision, and not like a person who was beginning to understand with increasing clarity that he had made a catastrophic one. His eyes kept returning to the lockbox, the brushed steel surface, the card inside it. He had put that card in there, with 2 fingers, with the exaggerated carefulness of someone performing thoroughness for an audience. He had clicked the lid shut, and he had smiled, and he had said, "We'll need to verify this with the issuing bank," and had felt in that moment competent, useful, like a person who understood the assignment. He looked at the woman. She was standing the same way she'd been standing since she walked up to the desk. The same posture, the same quality of attention. Like the last 20 minutes had cost her nothing, and also like they had cost her everything. And she had simply decided not to show either one. He thought, "She knows something we don't." Then he thought, "No, that's not quite right. She knows something we do know, and have been pretending we don't." That was worse. He looked at Warren. Then he looked back at the lockbox. Then very quiet so only Warren could hear. "What if we're wrong?" Not a question. The statement of a man who had already answered it. Warren didn't look at him. "We are not wrong. Her name is in the system." Bryce, Soledad said the override clearance is. "Do not." Warren turned to him, eyes flat. The voice of someone used to being the last word. "Finish that sentence." Bryce looked at him, then looked at the lockbox, then did something he would remember for the rest of his career. He looked at his own hands, the hands that had taken the card, and he thought, "I knew. In the moment I did it. Something in me knew, and I did it anyway, because I wanted Warren to see me doing the right thing. And I had confused Warren's version of right with actual right. That was the part he would have to live with. The knowing. Jordan Faber had stopped narrating. She did that sometimes when the thing in front of her became too real for commentary. When the commentary would be a frame around something that was more important than the frame. She just kept filming. Her hands were steady. 4 years of doing this had given her steady hands. Eli was narrating quietly into his phone, not sensationally. The specific register of someone describing what they see, because they believe seeing requires witnessing. She hasn't raised her voice once. Not once. They called security, and security showed up and hasn't done anything, which tells you something about what security sees when it looks at that situation. There are guests in the lobby who've stopped what they were doing. The concierge came out from her station. That older gentleman, he just walked over and stood beside her about 10 minutes ago. He doesn't know her. You can tell he doesn't know her. He's just standing there. Someone in the comments typed, "She owns the hotel, doesn't she?" Eli read it. Didn't say anything. Looked at the woman, thought, maybe, then thought, it doesn't matter, then filmed. Warren Stills picked up the desk phone. He called Curtis Hadley. Curtis Hadley was 55 years old and had been the regional director of Reeves Hospitality Group for the Midwest Corridor for 4 years. He had an office 3 blocks from the Pinnacle Grand. He had 14 properties under his oversight. He had a professional reputation built on low complaint cancellation rates and consistent guest satisfaction scores, and a way of managing upward that made him appear indispensable. He did not answer. Warren called again. The phone rang 5 times and went to voicemail. He hung up, called again. Voicemail. He set the phone down with the careful control of a man who wanted to do something else with it. He did not understand. He did not understand because he didn't have the piece of information that would make the not answering make sense. He didn't know about the email. He didn't know what Audra had sent to Naomi's phone 14 minutes ago. He didn't know that Curtis Hadley was 3 blocks away watching a screen with the particular expression of a man who has been building something for a long time and has just understood that the thing he built is coming down. Warren just knew that Curtis wasn't answering. And that was, in its own way, the beginning of understanding. Audra Fleming had been sitting in a coffee shop on Wabash since 7:30. She had a laptop open and 3 tabs running and a cortado she'd been nursing for an hour. She had worked for Naomi Reeves for 6 years. She understood after 6 years that the annual anonymous audit was not a team exercise. Naomi went alone, always, because the point was the truth of it, and the truth required the absence of anyone who might alter the environment simply by being recognizably affiliated. Audra's job on audit days was to be ready. Ready meant the compliance files were pulled and current. The HR contacts were on standby. The legal team had been briefed on the possibility of employment actions. The documentation systems were running. Margaret Stone had been notified the previous evening that her services might be required in the morning. And one other thing. 3 weeks ago, during a routine audit of regional communications, a flag had appeared in the compliance system. An email, sent 14 months prior from Curtis Hadley's corporate account to Warren Stills' management account. It had been buried in a quarterly archive, misfiled under a routine operations thread. The compliance algorithm had found it on its 3rd pass. Audra had read it. Then she had read it again. Then she had printed it, put it in a folder, and placed the folder on Naomi's desk without a note, because some things don't need framing. Naomi had come in the next morning, read it, and said nothing for a long time. Then she had said, "Schedule the audit for next month." The audit had been scheduled, and this morning at 9:27, when Naomi sent a single text that said, "Send it," Audra had forwarded the email to Naomi's phone and then sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Because what happened next was not going to be small. Naomi's phone buzzed in her pocket. She didn't take it out immediately. She let it sit for a moment. Finished looking at Warren. Finished looking at the lobby. Finished the breath she was in the middle of. Then she reached into her pocket and opened the message. The email was exactly as she remembered it from 3 weeks ago, when she'd read it the first time at her desk. But, reading it here, standing in this lobby, with the intercom announcement still hanging in the air, it was different. The subject line, Re-Q1 Positioning Strategy. The date, March 14th of the previous year. The sender, Curtis Hadley, Regional Director, Reeves Hospitality Group Midwest. Recipient, Warren Stills, General Manager, Pinnacle Grand Hotel. The body, Warren, as we discussed, maintaining Pinnacle's premium market positioning requires consistent judgment at the point of guest contact. Prioritization of our core demographic is at your discretion. Any complaints that arise from this approach should be routed through my office first before reaching corporate review. I'll manage the paper trail from this end. Keep up the good work. 14 months. 3 of Soledad's complaints. 8 from guests. 11 documented incidents of discriminatory treatment at the point of guest contact. All routed to Hadley's office. All buried. Not mishandled, not overlooked. Deliberately stopped before they could travel any further up the chain. I'll manage the paper trail from this end. Naomi read the email, folded her phone, put it back in her pocket. Her face did not change, not because she wasn't feeling anything. She was a great many things. The specific exhaustion of discovering that someone she had trusted and promoted and given responsibility to had been using that responsibility to protect the exact thing she had spent 12 years trying to dismantle. She was feeling that. She was also feeling something that would take her longer to name, something that had to do with the 11 incidents, the people they represented, the experience of filing a complaint and receiving silence, of going through the proper channel and discovering the proper channel had been rerouted. She knew what that felt like, not abstractly. She knew. She breathed it in, held it, breathed it out, and she waited. Her mother used to say it on Sunday mornings. Hot as a lesson. Ruth Reeves was not a woman who delivered lessons in the formal sense. She delivered them the way she did everything. While doing something else, while making eggs, while folding laundry, while looking out the window at the yard, she'd say, "Naomi, people who close doors have never had to stand outside one." Naomi had heard it first at 14. She'd understood half of it, the half about the people who close doors. Then she'd say, "One day you'll understand why they do it." Naomi had understood that part at 29, standing in a Los Angeles hotel lobby for 2 hours in a suit she'd saved for. She'd understood it with the cold clarity of someone who has been made to wait long enough to think it through. Fear. That was the why. Not confidence. Fear in a costume. People who are afraid of the space diminishing keep the space by controlling who enters it. Warren Stills was afraid. Had probably always been afraid. Cufflinks and the vocabulary and the premium positioning were the architecture of the fear, not the evidence of something real. She understood that. Understanding isn't the same as accepting. That was the last part. The part her mother always added, and the part that had taken the longest to make sense. Because for a while Naomi had thought that understanding was supposed to lead to accepting. That if you understood why people did things, you arrived at some kind of peace with it. Ruth Reeves had known better. You understand it so you don't mistake it for something it isn't. So you don't spend your energy being confused when you could be spending it doing something about it. Understanding isn't the same as accepting. This was not something Naomi was going to accept. The lobby had been shifting. Not dramatically, not all at once. The way bodies shift in a room when the center of gravity changes, slowly, deliberately. The woman with the gray blazer and reading glasses pushed up on her head, the one who had been at a table near the lobby bar with a coffee, had moved from her table a position closer to the front desk. She wasn't at the desk. She was just closer. Then the man in the navy suit from the seating area had stood up and moved. Then a woman with a rolling carry-on who had been waiting for her companion near the elevator bank had drifted toward the front. Nobody announced it. Nobody organized it. It wasn't a protest. Organic movement of people who were watching something and had made a decision, individually and then collectively, about which side of it they were on. Reginald Tate noticed it. He had been standing beside Naomi long enough now to feel the room the way you feel a room when you're no longer an observer in it. He was part of the furniture of the situation, just the standing man. He saw the others moving and recognized the motion. He thought about his classroom, 31 years of it, how the way a class shifts when something real is being said, the way bodies orient toward truth. He stayed where he was. The woman with the reading glasses stepped up to the front desk. She wasn't going to be quiet anymore. You could see the decision happening in real time. The moment of yes, and then the following through on it. She put her hand on the counter. She said, "I stayed here last October. I filed a complaint about how I was treated at check-in. I'm a 64-year-old woman traveling alone, and the experience at this desk was humiliating. I submitted the form through the website. I was told it had been reviewed and addressed." She opened her handbag, took out a folded piece of paper, laid it flat on the counter. I kept a copy. Because nobody ever called, she stepped back. A man, late 50s, the navy suit, someone who had the look of a regular business traveler, moved to the desk. "I requested an ADA accessible room 6 weeks ago. Was told none were available. Watched 2 people check in directly after me and get rooms on the accessible floor. I have a cane. I've been using this hotel for 4 years. He stepped back, the woman with the carry-on. I was charged twice for a one-night stay in September. I called the front desk 4 times, was told it would be investigated. I had to go through my credit card company to recover the funds. 3 weeks later, I got an email saying the issue had been resolved. She looked at Warren. It had not been resolved. I had resolved it. Your hotel had my money for 3 weeks and never returned it voluntarily. She stepped back one by one, steady, like water coming in, not coordinated, not rehearsed, just a sequence of people who had been waiting separately for a reason to say the thing they'd already lived. Warren stood behind the counter and watched it happen, and his face was doing something complicated. The careful blankness of someone working very hard to maintain a surface while everything underneath it was shifting. Naomi heard every word. She didn't turn around to look. She didn't need to. She could hear them and she understood exactly what was happening. This was the part that never made the single incident story. The part that the one visible moment cracked open. All the other moments that had been sitting quietly under the surface, waiting for a reason to be said. Waiting for the knowledge that if you said it, someone might actually hear it this time. The woman in October, the man who needed the accessible room, the double charge that took 4 phone calls to not get resolved and 3 for not more to actually resolve it. These were not accidents, they were a system, and a system, by definition, does not happen by accident. She thought about Soledad's 3 complaints. Reviewed, no action required, or nothing at all. She thought about the email. I'll manage the paper trail from this end. She thought about Curtis Hadley in his office, 3 blocks away, not answering his phone. And she thought about 11 people. The files Margaret had sent 3 weeks ago. 11 individuals dismissed from the Pinnacle Grand over the previous 18 months under Warren Stills' management. The stated reason in each file: attitude inconsistent with brand values, or performance not meeting standards, or cultural fit concerns. 11 people. She knew one name in particular, Beverly Drum, 36 years old, 5 years at the Pinnacle Grand, named Employee of the Year in 2022, had trained more than half the current front desk staff, had been dismissed in January of 2023. The file said, attitude inconsistent with brand values. Naomi had read that file 3 weeks ago in her quiet office and had felt something cold and specific move through her, because she knew what attitude inconsistent with brand values meant at a hotel where the brand values included a system for deciding in 3 seconds who belonged in the lobby. It meant she spoke up. It meant she didn't make herself small enough. It meant she was Beverly Drum, and Warren Stills couldn't figure out how to manage that, so he removed it 18 months ago. Naomi thought about her. She thought, I don't know where she is right now or whether she's okay. She thought, I'm about to find out. Bryce Okafor said very quietly, Warren. Warren was watching the guests at the counter. His jaw had gone tight. His cufflinks were very still. What do we do? He said it the way a young person says it when the older person they've been following has walked past them somewhere and stopped, and there's nowhere left to go. What do we do? Warren said nothing, which was, in its own way, the most honest thing he'd said all morning. Darlene Pruitt's hands were still flat on the cold marble. She had been standing like that for several minutes. It wasn't a choice anymore. It was the only way she could feel anything stable. The cold of the counter, real, consistent, not changing. Everything else was changing. She thought about Earl, her grandfather, gone since 2019, but present this morning in the specific way that people come back when you need them most and least simultaneously. Earl Pruitt had taken her to her first baseball game when she was 8 years old. She remembered the drive, the way he dressed for it, careful in a way that was not about vanity, pressed shirt, good shoes, the particular dignity of a man who knew certain places would look for reasons and had decided not to give them any. On the parking lot, a man had followed them for 2 rows before veering off. Earl hadn't said anything, hadn't altered his pace, just walked. And when Darlene had asked why that man was following them, Earl had looked at her with an expression she didn't have full vocabulary for at 8, but understood completely now. He'd said, some people decide they know you before you open your mouth. That's their problem. Don't you ever start agreeing with them. She had forgotten that. That was the thing. You forget things. Life fills up with other things. Bills, rent, performance reviews. The 100 small decisions about which things are worth the cost of standing up for. And somewhere in the filling up, the things your grandfather told you get buried under the more immediate urgencies. She had pressed that button. with her hand. Voice? Into a microphone. Possible unauthorized guest. About this woman. While Earl's words were somewhere in her, and she had not heard them. She looked at Naomi Reeves standing at the counter. She thought, I knew. I knew from the moment she walked up. Something in me knew, and I pressed the button anyway, and I told myself it was protocol, and it was not protocol. It was the thing underneath the protocol. The thing Warren never said in words. The thing that had slowly, over 3 years, been absorbed until she couldn't tell anymore, where Warren's judgment ended, and her own began. Something broke open in Darlene Pruitt's chest. Not loudly. Nobody in the lobby would have known it happened, but it happened. Eli's livestream hit 5,000, then 6, then it jumped. Because someone with a larger platform had seen it and shared it, then someone else, then a chain of shares that had the particular velocity of things that resonate, not because they're spectacular, but because they're recognized. Because the people watching had a category for it immediately. Because it arrived in their feed and they knew what they were looking at before the first sentence of the caption. The comments were running faster than anyone could read them. I know exactly what I'm watching. That man needs to stop talking right now. She hasn't moved, not once. Look at the older man standing next to her. He doesn't know her. I can tell he doesn't know her. Who is she? She's whoever she is. That's not the point. That last one. Jordan read it and looked up from her screen and looked at the lobby and thought, yes, exactly yes. Warren Stills picked up the phone again. Curtis Hadley, voicemail, he set it down. He looked at the lobby, at the guests who were still at the counter, at the complaint the woman with the reading glasses had put down on his desk, at the people who were now standing closer to the desk than they had been 20 minutes ago, at Soledad who had not moved, at Paul who had not moved, at Bryce who was looking at the lockbox with an expression Warren didn't like. He thought about the email. He thought about it not because he expected it to be a problem. He had been careful, always, about what was written and what wasn't, about the specific language that was policy adjacent without being policy explicit. But because Curtis wasn't answering his phone and that had a different texture now than it had had 20 minutes ago, something was trying to form in Warren's mind. He kept not looking directly at it. The lobby doors opened, not Paul from the corridor, not a guest from outside, not anyone Warren had called or expected. Curtis Hadley walked in. He had not been called. He had received 4 voicemails from Warren and had not returned them. He had sat in his office 3 blocks away and watched, on Eli Wachowski's live stream, the thing that was unfolding in his hotel. He had watched it for 11 minutes. Then he had picked up his jacket and walked out of his office and gotten into his car. He was not entirely sure what he was going to say when he got there. He was entirely sure he had to go. 55 years old, good suit. The posture of a man who had spent 30 years building authority in rooms. He crossed the lobby with the walk of someone who was used to arrival meaning something. He looked at Warren. He looked at the guests at the counter. He looked at Soledad standing at the desk edge. He looked at the elderly man standing beside the woman. And then he looked at Naomi Reeves. And he stopped walking. Warren said, Curtis, thank God, this woman has been. Curtis raised one hand. Not to Warren, he was looking at Naomi, he said quietly. Meeps, Jeeps. 2 words and the lobby understood. Not all at once. In a wave, like something rolling from one end of the room to the other. The woman at the coffee table. The man in the navy suit. The young couple near the elevator bank who had drifted closer. Jordan Faber. Eli. Paul by the corridor entrance. And Soledad Vega, who had known from the beginning, who felt something move through her that was not vindication and was not quite relief, but was the specific feeling of a truth that has been waiting, arriving finally into the light. Someone whispered, wait. Someone else. She owns it. Then a woman near the bar said, not whispering, she owns the hotel. Not a question. A statement of something that had just become real. Warren heard it. He looked at Curtis. He looked at Naomi. His face did something that had not done in the 6 years he had managed this property. The surface cracked, just slightly, a hairline fracture in the performance of composure. He said slowly, like a man hearing a translation for the first time, she's? Curtis said, the owner, yes. Bryce Okafor sat down. Nobody told him to. Nobody directed him to seat or asked him to step back. His legs simply made the decision. He went down slowly until he was sitting on the floor behind the desk, back against the cabinet. Knees up, looking at the ceiling. He was 27 years old. He had been in this job for 8 months. He had wanted very badly to be good at it. He thought about what he had thought good at it meant 8 months ago. He thought about what he understood it to mean now. The distance between those two things was the worst feeling he had ever had in a professional context, and he understood sitting on the floor with his back against a cabinet that it was supposed to feel this bad, that the feeling was accurate. He looked at the lockbox. He thought, I have to give the card back. Not because he was told to yet, because it was hers and he had taken it, and that was the beginning and the end of it. He stood up. He walked to the edge of the desk. He unlocked the box. He picked up the card with both hands, properly, like an object that belonged to someone. He held it out. Naomi looked at it. Then she looked at him. His hands were not entirely steady. He said, I'm sorry. She looked at him for a long time, long enough that he had to keep looking back, long enough that he couldn't look away. What he saw in her face was not what he had expected. He had expected anger. He had expected contempt. He had expected some version of the satisfactory person who has been proved right in front of a lobby full of witnesses. What he saw instead was something that he wouldn't have a complete name for until much later, when he had thought about this morning many times and approached it from many angles. It looked like grief, the grief of someone who has had this happen before, who knows that she will have it happen again, understands that this morning is not an exception to a rule but a particularly visible instance of a pattern that has been running for a very long time. The grief of someone who is 42 years old and the CEO of 57 hotels and is still standing in a lobby being handed her own credit card by a 27-year-old who took it with 2 fingers and a smile. He saw that. He didn't fully understand it yet, but he saw it. Naomi took the card. She put it in the front pocket of her jeans. She looked at Warren Stills. Warren was a man who had been recalibrating for the last 90 seconds and had not found a stable position yet. His face was doing something controlled and strained at the same time, like a person trying to apply the same tools to a situation they were not designed for. He said, I didn't know who. I know you didn't. Her voice was even. Still the same temperature it had been at 9:14 when she first walked through those doors. That's exactly the point. She let that sit. Warren opened his mouth. She said, I gave you my ID, my reservation, my card, everything you ask of any guest. And you looked at me and you decided. Before I finished my first sentence, you had already decided. Warren said, there are protocols. There are no protocols that end with a woman's credit card in a lockbox and an announcement over a public intercom calling her unauthorized. She looked at him steadily. You know that. You've known it since the moment Soledad came out from her station, and you told her she was one word away from losing her job. Something moved across Warren's face. Not remorse. Not yet. Something more like recognition. The specific recognition of a person who has been explaining to themselves for a long time that what they were doing had a different name, encountering the correct name in public for the first time. He said nothing. Naomi reached into her pocket. She took out her phone. She called a number. 1 ring. Audra, ready, get Margaret. She's already in the building. Naomi lowered the phone and looked around the lobby one more time. At the woman who'd filed the complaint in October. At the man who needed the accessible room. At Soledad, who had stopped being afraid. At Reginald Tate, who had not moved from her side. At Curtis Hadley, who was sitting in a velvet armchair now. Not because he had been asked to, but because his legs had made the same decision Bryce's had. At Jordan and Eli, whose combined audience was now somewhere north of 20,000 people and climbing. At a lobby full of people who had not left, who were still here, watching, and waiting like she was for what came next. She breathed in 1 breath, and she was ready. Margaret Stone walked through the lobby doors at 9:41 in the morning. She didn't hurry. That was the first thing people noticed. On a room that had been running on adrenaline for the better part of an hour. She moved with the unhurried deliberateness of someone who understood that what she was about to do did not require speed, but required precision. 51 years old. Silver looks pinned back neatly. A charcoal blazer over a white shirt, flat shoes, a leather portfolio tucked under her left arm. She had been the chief human resources officer of Reeves Hospitality Group for 7 years. She had handled difficult situations in 11 cities. She had never once raised her voice in a professional context because she had learned, early in her career, that the people who raise their voices are usually the people who aren't sure the words are enough. Margaret was sure of her words. She crossed the lobby, stopped beside Naomi, opened the portfolio. She looked at Warren Stills, at Bryce Okafor, who had stood back up from the floor and was now standing to the side of the desk with his hands at his sides, at Darlene Pruitt, whose hands were still flat on the cold marble. She said to the room, in the voice of someone reading something that had been carefully prepared and carefully true. My name is Margaret Stone. I am the Chief Human Resources Officer of Reeves Hospitality Group. I am here to execute a series of employment actions, effective immediately. The lobby went quiet in a way that lobbies almost never go quiet. Not the ambient quiet of a well-run space. The held breath silence of a room understanding that something permanent is happening. Warren David Stills. Margaret didn't look up from the portfolio. General Manager, Pinnacle Grand Hotel, Chicago. Effective as of 9:41 a.m. Your employment with Reeves Hospitality Group is terminated. Grounds include discriminatory conduct toward a guest, abuse of managerial authority, participation in the suppression of guest and staff complaints, and coordinated violation of corporate equity policy over a period of not less than 14 months. She turned a page. Your system access has been revoked as of 9:38 a.m. Your keycard is deactivated. Building security will escort you from the premises, following the opportunity to collect personal items from your office. Formal documentation will be delivered within 24 hours. She turned another page. Bryce Okafor. Bryce went very still. Not the stillness of someone who hadn't seen it coming. The stillness of someone who had seen it coming and was trying to receive it with whatever dignity they had left. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. Grounds include participation in discriminatory conduct toward a guest and unlawful confiscation of guest property. She turned another page. Darlene Pruitt. Darlene did not move her hands from the counter. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. Grounds include participation in discriminatory conduct and activation of false security protocols against a guest in good standing. Margaret closed the portfolio. The room Warren said, "You can't just, Mr. Stills." Naomi's voice, quiet, the same temperature it had been all morning. "It's done." He looked at her, and this time he really looked. Not through the 3-second assessment he had made when she walked through the doors. Not through the layer of vocabulary and protocol and brand positioning he had been using for 6 years to describe a thing that had a simpler, uglier name. Just her, standing in a navy t-shirt and jeans with a scuff on her left sneaker in the lobby that she owned. He said, "Why didn't you tell us who you were? Not aggressive, not defensive, just asked." The way a man asks something when the answer is the last thing he has left to hold on to. Naomi looked at him for a long moment. She said, "Because I shouldn't have to." She let that sit. "Because every single guest who walked through that door before me shouldn't have had to either." She held his gaze. "You didn't fail me this morning, Mr. Stills. I own this building. I'll recover from this morning just fine. You failed every guest who didn't." Warren opened his mouth, nothing came, which was, in the end, the most accurate thing he had said all morning. Bryce Okafor didn't sit down again. He stood to the side of the desk with his hands at his sides, and he looked at all floor, and he did the thing that is harder than any professional consequence. He thought about who he had been at 8 this morning, eager, useful, ready to demonstrate good judgment. He thought about what good judgment had meant to him 4 hours ago versus what it meant to him now. The distance between some things was not comfortable to stand in, but he stood in it, because it was accurate. He thought about the card, 2 fingers, the click of the lockbox, the smile. He kept returning to the smile, not because it was the worst thing he'd done. The taking of the card was worse, technically, in terms of consequence, but because the smile was the part that revealed what had happened inside him. The smile was the proof that he had been taught a thing so thoroughly he had stopped being able to feel it as wrong. That was going to take time to unlearn. He understood that now. He looked up when Naomi turned in his direction. She looked at him for a moment. She said, "You're 27. He said nothing. "What you did this morning was wrong. I need you to understand it was wrong. Not procedurally, not technically. Wrong in the way that matters." She paused. "And you're 27, which means you have time. But time doesn't do the work by itself." She looked at him a moment longer. Then she moved on, and Bryce Okafor stood there with those words and understood they were the most useful thing anyone had said to him in 8 months. Darlene Pruitt finally moved her hands. She lifted them from the counter and held them for a moment in front of her, just looking at them. Then she let them fall to her sides. She said, "I knew. Just that. Into the space of the lobby. Naomi turned to her. Darlene said, when she walked in, I knew something was wrong with what we were doing. I felt it. She stopped, steadied. I pressed the button anyway. She was not performing it, not making a speech. Us stating a fact about herself that cost something to The lobby was listening. She let it listen. I'm sorry. Still not performing, just the words. Not because of what it cost me, because of what it cost you. Naomi looked at her for a long time, the kind of long that most people fill with something, a word, a reassurance, a softening. Naomi didn't fill it. She let Darlene stand in what she had said. Then she said, You're 30 years old. Darlene waited. Which means someone in your life, a grandmother, a grandfather, a parent, someone who came before you and knew things you haven't had to learn yet. Told you something about this. About how to move through rooms that don't always make space for you. About what you owe yourself when that happens. Darlene's eyes went very still, because there was Earl, right there, not summoned by name, summoned by the shape of the truth. Naomi said, Whatever they told you, go back to it. Because you knew this morning? I could see it in how you were standing. Something in you knew and you did it anyway. A pause. That's the work, not the knowing. The knowing is just the beginning. The work is what you do after. Darlene said nothing, because there was nothing to say that wasn't smaller than what had just been said. Naomi looked at her one moment longer. Then she moved on, and Darlene stood there with her hands at her sides and thought about a man who had pressed a shirt before a baseball and walked through a parking lot without changing his pace and told an 8-year-old girl the most important thing she would ever need to know. Don't you ever start agreeing with them. She hadn't just forgotten it this morning. She had pressed a button with her own hand. That was going to take time. But she understood, standing there in what used to be her lobby, that time was the beginning of the work and not the work itself. She would have to do the rest. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. Curtis Hadley was still in the velvet armchair. He had sat down 12 minutes ago. Not because he was asked, not because his legs gave out, but because he had walked into this lobby with some half-formed idea of explaining something, and had seen the room and understood that there was nothing left to explain. The email was known. He could see it in Naomi's face, in the way she had looked at him when he walked in. Not surprise. The specific look of someone who already had the document and had been waiting for the person to catch up to it. He had been a regional director for 4 years. He had built a reputation on clean numbers, low complaint escalation rate. He understood those numbers differently now. Sitting in this chair, in this lobby, looking at the woman with the reading glasses, who had put a copy of her complaint on the desk, the man who had needed an accessible room, the woman with the carry-on. Low complaint escalation rate meant the complaints had been stopped before they escalated. By him, deliberately, carefully, with the specific language of a man who knew how to manage paper cut trails. The numbers were clean because he had cleaned them, and beneath the clean numbers were 11 people dismissed from this building. A concierge who had filed 3 complaints and gotten silence. A year and 2 months of guests who had been told, in the language of hospitality and protocol, that they didn't quite fit the profile. He looked at his hands. He thought about writing that email. March of last year, Tuesday afternoon. He had written it in 7 minutes. He had reread it once and decided thus language was sufficiently indirect. He had sent it. Keep up the good work. He thought about what work he had been asking Warren to keep up. Naomi walked toward him. He started to stand. Don't. He sat back down. She stood in front of him. She said, Curtis. He looked up. I promoted you 4 years ago because I believed you understood what this company was supposed to be. He said nothing. I need to know if I was wrong about that. Not about the email. About you. Were you always someone who would write that email, or did you become him? Curtis looked at her. He thought about the question with the seriousness it deserved. He said, I think I became him. Slowly, over time. He paused. I told myself it was pragmatic, that the complaint escalation was noise, that Warren's numbers were good and the guests who complained were the exception, not the rule. He stopped. I was choosing which guests to believe. The lobby was very quiet. He said, That's not an excuse. No, Naomi said. It's not. She looked at him steadily. But it's something. Because if you became him, you can become someone else. She paused. Whether you will is a question I don't have the answer to yet. She stepped back. Margaret will be in touch about the formal process. You'll cooperate fully. Every communication, every complaint file, every routing decision, all of it. Curtis said. Yes, she said, and then you're going to sit in that chair until I'm done here. Because there are people in this lobby who trusted this company and got buried paperwork. You're going to look at them. He looked at the guests at the counter, the woman with the reading glasses, the man with the cane he'd left at his seat, the woman who had spent 3 weeks waiting for a refund that never came without her fighting for it. He looked at them, and he did not look away. Warren Stills came back from his office with a cardboard box. The walk across the lobby was a particular kind of walk, the kind that has nowhere to go except through. No shortcut, no side exit. Just the full length of the marble floor, under the chandeliers, past the guests, past the concierge desk, past everything that had been his territory for 6 years and was no longer. He walked it. Paul, the security guard, walked 2 measured paces behind him. Not close enough to be hostile, present enough to be clear. Some guests watched. Some looked away. Not as enough sympathy. Out of the particular discomfort of witnessing someone arrive at the end of something they built on a foundation that was always going to give. Harren reached the doors. He stopped. He turned. He looked at the lobby one last time. Naomi was at the front desk. She and Soledad had a yellow legal pad between them. Soledad was writing something. Naomi was pointing at something on the page. They were talking in the low, focused way of 2 people who have a great deal of work to do and have already started doing it. She did not look up. Warren stood there for 4 seconds. Then he pushed through the doors. The Chicago cold met him on the sidewalk. He stood in it. He had been managing hotels for over 20 years. He had survived bad quarters and staff crises, and a burst pipe on a New Year's Eve. He had survived all of those things because they were solvable, because they were problems with solutions, and the solutions were within his authority to implement. This was different, because the thing he was standing outside of, with his cardboard box on a sidewalk in October, was not a crisis he'd been unable to solve. It was a thing he had built. He had built it over 6 years with small decisions that seemed, individually, like nothing. A tone, a look, a piece of vocabulary. A system that was never written down, because everyone involved understood without it being written exactly what it meant. He had built it and called it standards. I stood on the sidewalk for a long time. The wind came off the lake the way it always did, finding every gap. He walked away. Margaret Stone found Curtis Hadley still in the velvet armchair at 10:12. He had not moved since Naomi told him to look at the guests at the counter. He had looked. He was still looking, or trying to, in the way of someone who has understood that looking is the minimum requirement, and is trying to decide what comes after it. Margaret sat down in the chair across from him. She opened the portfolio. She said, "Curtis." He looked at her. "Effective as of 10 o'clock this morning, your position as Regional Director for Reeves Hospitality Group Midwest is terminated." She said it without ceremony, without the particular coldness that would have made it punitive theater. Just the fact of it. Grounds include deliberate suppression of guest and staff complaints, misuse of corporate authority, and written instruction to a subordinate to engage in discriminatory prioritization. Curtis said, "I know. Your access to all Reeves systems has been revoked. You'll receive formal documentation within 24 hours. He said, "Yes. The compliance team will be in contact regarding the full communications review. We'll need every email, every routing decision, every complaint file you received from this property over the past 14 months. All of it. You'll have it." Haas said it without hesitation. Not because he was afraid of what would happen if he didn't. Because he had been sitting in this armchair for 40 minutes, looking at the woman who had filed her complaint in October and never heard back. Looking at the man who had needed the accessible room. Looking at the woman with the carry-on who had spent 3 weeks waiting for a refund from his carefully managed paper trail. He owed them the complete record. He was going to give it. Margaret closed the portfolio. She said, "Is there anything you want to say before I go?" Curtis thought about it. He thought about the email, March 14th. 7 minutes to write. 1 reread sent. "Keep up the good work." He said, "I'd like to speak to Miss Reeves before I leave, not to explain. Just to say that I know what it is and I know why it was wrong. She deserves to hear it directly." Margaret said, "I'll ask her." Curtis stayed in the armchair. He thought about 14 months, about the specific mathematics of small decisions, each one seeming, individually, like a judgment call. And all of them accumulated, amounting to a system that had told certain people they were the wrong kind of guest. I had managed the paper trail. He understood now exactly what he had managed. Naomi came to him 20 minutes later. She didn't sit, he said. I know there's nothing I can say that undoes it. She said no. I told myself it was operational. That Warren's numbers were clean and the complaints were outliers. For 14 months. He stopped. I was choosing whose experience counted. I didn't use those words. But that's what I was doing. She said, why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know I understand what I did. Not just that I got caught. She said, does your daughter know how to reach you? 'Cause Curtis is my daughter, you have one. Early 30s. I remember the photo on your desk. She's 33. Call her today. Not about this. Just call her. He didn't understand exactly what she meant. He said, okay, the compliance team needs everything by end of week. Because those people deserve to have their complaints heard 14 months ago, and the least we can do is make the record complete. End of week. Everything. She walked back to the front desk. Curtis sat for another 5 minutes. Then he stood up, straightened his jacket. The automatic gesture of a man whose mind was somewhere else. He walked across the marble floor and pushed through the front doors. The October cold met him on the sidewalk. He took out his phone. He called his daughter. She answered on the second ring. Dad, it's 10:30 in the morning. I know. I just wanted to hear your voice. A pause. You okay? He said, I will be. I have some things to fix first. He started walking, away from the building. Can we have dinner Thursday? Of course. I'll tell you everything Thursday. He meant that. He was going to have to. Soledad Vega's legal pad had 3 columns. Immediate actions, 30-day priorities, structural review. She had filled the immediate actions column in 4 minutes. The list had been living in her head for 18 months. Every time she had filed a complaint and received silence. Every time she had made herself small enough to stay. That moment was now. Staff notification of leadership change. Complaint backlog review. All 11 suppressed files. Accessible room audit today. Refund processing for the double charge case. Personal apology delivered before checkout. Naomi read list. You've been thinking about this since about the 3rd unanswered complaint. Naomi picked up the pen, added 1 line at the top. Soledad read it. Her breath caught. Just slightly. Contact all 11 former staff dismissed under Stills 2022-2024. Initiate reinstatement interview process today. Audra made the calls from a quiet corner of the lobby. 11 names. The list she had been building for 3 weeks. The conversations were short. Simple, true things don't require elaboration. Your dismissal is under a review. The leadership has changed. We'd like to speak with you about returning if that's something you'd consider. So, no pressure. But the door is open. 3 people needed time. 2 said no, plainly, and Audra thanked them and meant it. 3 said yes immediately. And Beverly Drum said yes after a pause of 4 seconds that contained everything. Beverly arrived at 11:17. She had driven in from Evanston, changed her shirt twice before leaving, which told her something about what this morning meant. 5 years at the Pinnacle Grand. She had trained the front desk staff, been named Employee of the Year in 2022, had a gift card from that award still in a drawer somewhere, because spending it had felt like letting go of something she wasn't ready to let go of. January 2023. Warren's office. Words like fit and direction, and unfortunately at this time, he had not looked at her once. She had cleaned out her locker in 40 minutes. She pushed through the front doors at 11:17. The lobby hit her. Same chandeliers, same marble. The physical memory of 5 years living in her body differently than any visual memory could. She stopped just inside the doors. She looked at the counter where she had stood for 5 years, at the person standing behind it. Soledad came around from the desk. They looked at each other. 2 women who had worked in the same building for 3 overlapping years and had shared, without fully discussing it, the experience of being in a place that was always slightly withholding something. Soledad said, you shouldn't have been fired. I didn't speak up when it happened. I saw when I said no, I care every day. Beverly was quiet. So was I. Old years. Always calculating. Always trying to be exactly the right amount of present without being too much. Soledad said, that's exhausting. It is. Soledad held out her hand. Beverly shook it. Then Soledad pulled her into a hug that was not planned and not professional and completely exactly right. Beverly laughed. Surprised first, then real, and held on. Reginald Tate was still in the lobby. His granddaughter was running late. He had been here well over an hour longer than planned, and had witnessed something he was going to be thinking about the rest of his life. He watched Beverly and Soledad in the center of the marble floor. He thought about his daughter, about the airport 8 years ago, about the particular mathematics of regret, how it accumulates not in the dramatic failures, but in the small ones. The moments where you had the option and chose the easier path. He had made that calculation at the airport. He had not made it today, he thought. It is not enough. One morning, one decision to stand up after decades of sitting down. But it was something, and something accumulated was how things changed. He picked up his newspaper, didn't open it, just held it, and watched the lobby becoming something different. Naomi found him before she went upstairs. Mr. Tate, I don't know why you got up from that chair, but I want you to know I saw it. I have a daughter, 38, an architect in Atlanta. 8 years ago, I watched something happen to her and I didn't stand up. Ha paused. I think about that airport. I know, she said. I can tell. I'm sorry I didn't do it sooner. Not just today. In general, she said sooner would have been better. But today was real. She held out her hand. He shook it. The handshake of a man who meant what his hands did. Call your daughter tonight. I was already planning to. She nodded. Then she went upstairs. She took the elevator to the 14th floor. Not the penthouse. Not yet. She walked the corridor slowly, feeling the proportions she had approved, the carpet she had chosen, the lighting fixtures she had spent a long time on. She stopped at the window at the end of the hall. Chicago spread out below, October sky, the lake visible at the edge of the frame, going on until it looked like it might be the ocean. She reached into her pocket, the napkin. She unfolded it, her own handwriting, 29 years old. Sitting in a car in Los Angeles with something in her chest that had stopped being grief and become something harder and more useful. I will own this. She read it. She thought about Ruth Reeves, riding a bus through this neighborhood for 22 years. Before sunrise, after midnight, moving through these streets toward buildings like this one, where she was the labor and not the guest. She had done it with her hands, and with a dignity so complete that Naomi had absorbed it without knowing. Had carried it in her posture, in her breathing, in the way you stand in a room that doesn't want you and stay standing anyway. Mom, we're in. She folded the napkin, put it back in her pocket. Not yet. She wasn't ready yet. But someday she would put it somewhere it didn't need to travel anymore. 3 months later, same building, same address, same 40 stories of glass and limestone. Different. Not cosmetically. Naomi had considered renovation, rebrand, name change. Said no to all of it. For the same reason, she had let Warren and Bryce and Darlene walk through the lobby on their way out instead of the side exit. Stay. You fix it, you remember. Near the front desk, a small bronze plaque. Every guest who walks through this door belongs here. No name, no attribution, just the thing that should always have been true. Soledad arrived at 7 a.m. every morning now because she wanted to, because this was hers, not the way the building was Naomi's. The way work is yours when you're doing it right. Beverly Drum led the guest experience division, with the authority of someone who had been removed from a place, and came back knowing exactly what she was there to do. Warren's file had called it attitude inconsistent with brand values. It was the most valuable thing on the floor. Paul was still at the door, greeting every person who came in, not because policy said to, because he had spent a morning watching what happened when a building stopped meaning it. He meant it now. Mrs. Adeyemi came back in December. She had booked it herself. 2 weeks after the morning, everything changed. Before any letter from the hotel arrived, she wanted to see whether what she'd witnessed had been real or performance. Soledad looked up, recognized her. Mrs. Adeyemi, welcome back. I wasn't sure I'd come back. I filed a complaint and heard nothing for 9 months. I started to wonder if I'd imagined how bad it was. You didn't imagine it. Has something actually changed? Soledad said. Come back in 6 months and tell us whether you think so. Mrs. Adeyemi picked up her key card. That's a reasonable answer. She said it like she meant it. Naomi went to Baltimore in November, past the elementary school, past the bus stop on Greenmount Avenue where her mother had waited in the dark more times than anyone counted. She slowed, didn't stop, just looked. Ruth Reeves, beloved mother. The dates underneath, the small American flag she always left because her mother would have found removing it unnecessarily complicated. She stood there for a while. November cold, drier than October. the kind that settles in. She thought about the lobby. Warren's face, Darlant remembering. Soledad finally saying no. Reginald Tate crossing the marble. Beverly walking through the doors. The plaque. She reached into her pocket. Napkin. I will own this. She read it one last time. Then she placed it against the base of the headstone. Tucked it under a small piece of quartz from the path, she thought. I carried it long enough. You would understand that. She turned around and walked back to the car. Past the bus stop one more time. A woman in an old coat. Before sunrise. Waiting for the bus that would take her to the hotel where she would make up rooms for people who would never know her name. What it cost to do that with dignity. Every day. For 22 years. The bus stop disappeared in the rearview mirror. Naomi drove. The Pinnacle Grand Hotel. Early morning. Before the guests are moving. Before the day has made any demands. The chandeliers on low. The marble floor reflecting pale gold light. The velvet armchairs empty. Near the front desk, the small bronze plaque catches the light. Every guest who through this door belongs here. In a few hours, the doors will open. People in suits and people in jeans. Designer luggage and duffels. People who have stayed here dozens of times, and people who have never stayed anywhere like this before. All of them coming through the door. All of them belonging. That is the work. Requires every morning the decision to mean it. The decision has to be made again every single day because the alternative rears itself every day. Quietly in the small choices, in the 3-second assessments, the decision is not automatic, but it can become a practice. And a practice, sustained, becomes a culture. That is what Naomi Reeves understood, standing in this lobby in a navy t-shirt with a scuff on her left sneaker. That is what Ruth Reeves had carried for 22 years in her hands. The door is for opening. That is the only thing it is for. Everything else is just the building.